Welcome to Far From Home with me, Mabel Ninan, your host. Today, we're going to have a conversation about immigration and theology. We will explore what the scriptures reveal about God's heart for immigrants and how these truths affect the way we perceive immigrants and engage with them. And my guest today is Daniel Montanez, who will help us break down important spiritual truths about biblical perspectives on migration. And this will be a three-part conversation. So today's episode is the first part of my conversation with Daniel. So let me introduce him to you real quickly. So Daniel is a PhD student at Boston University in theology, ethics, and philosophy. He's an adjunct instructor at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and Pentecostal Theological Seminary. He's also the founder and director of Migration Christian Conference and the Migration Crisis Initiative for the Church of God. He is a co-editor of The Church and Migration, a Theological Vision for the People of God. And this is the book that will kind of give us a structure to our conversations with him. So welcome, Daniel. We're so excited to be talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mabel. It's a privilege to be here.
So let's get right into it. But before we get into that subject, I'd like to know your background a little bit. I know that you're a second-generation immigrant, am I right?
Yes,
so tell us
that's correct.
a little bit about that and about your interest in immigration.
Yes, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. I am a second-generation Latino immigrant. My father was born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico. My mom was born in Mexicali, Mexico, so right at the border of Mexico and California. Interesting fact, on the opposite side of the border, it's Calexico, so California-Mexico border. So she comes from the Mexico side. And yeah, I was born in California, raised in Texas. And it wasn't until my years in seminary that I began to wrestle with what it meant to be a second-generation Latino immigrant. And I really began to explore these questions at a deeper level. I'll never forget, I had the opportunity to take a course at Harvard Divinity School with David Carrasco, and it was a class on human migration in the Mexico-US borderlands. And in this class, we began to read stories of immigrants at the border, of the realities in which people face on a daily basis, some of the humanitarian crises that take place at the border. And I began to reflect on my own story and on my own narrative as a second-generation immigrant. Also began to reflect on my own family's journey. My mom came when she was 6 or 7 years old. My grandparents crossed during that time as well, and living with many of the experiences of what it meant to be an immigrant, growing up in an immigrant church. I really began to think about what does it mean for my identity and my own I guess theological exploration to be a second-generation immigrant. So as I began to explore the stories of immigration from my own family, I began to ask questions about what is God's heart towards immigrant and towards migrating communities in our world today. And that's really where I began to dig into those questions that are touched upon in this book. And I began to ask that question of what is God's heart, but what is God's posture towards migrating communities throughout the Christian scriptures. So that's really where my interest came from. Really, I feel like as I've explored this topic, I've explored myself through this journey as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So is that how Migration Christian Conference came about, or what's your vision behind it?
That's absolutely right. So Migration Christian Conference is an annual conference that takes place every year. This year we're hosting our 5th annual conference, but it started back in 2018 when I was speaking with my then girlfriend, now wife, about my heart just to really explore these topics at a through the Christian scriptures. At the time, conversations on immigration were extremely politicized and polarized, and I really wanted to create a space where we could really just explore this topic through the lens of the Bible. and just to understand what does the Bible have to say about these things, and how can that begin to inform the way in which we love our neighbors and the way in which we engage with our immigrant communities, and allowing biblical ethics and the theology that is revealed in Scripture to inform all areas of our life, rather than allowing areas of our life to impact the way in which we understand our Christian identity. So really, that's where the idea and the purpose of the conference came from.
Wonderful. It's so important. The work that you're doing is so important, especially in this day and age. And, that's one of the reasons why I thought you would be perfect to have, these kind of conversations with me on this podcast. Before we get into the conversation about your book, tell us about the inspiration behind it. I know it's a compilation, in a sense, of essays by so many different scholars, and there's so many rich truths in this. How did you get the idea to put these together?
Yes, that's a great question. So, the chapters themselves are actually structured off of a resolution that is outlined at the end of the book. If you flip to the appendix, if you have the book, there's a statement there called the Migration Crisis Initiative Resolution, and this was actually developed out of a 6-month study that I did with 8 different pastors and leaders within the denomination of the Church of God, where I had enrolled into a diploma program at Fuller Theological Seminary in the church's response to the immigration crisis. And for 6 months, we explored the different dimensions of faith and immigration. So we explored the biblical theological perspectives. We explored the historical perspectives, the pastoral and the ministerial perspectives. All these things we explored for 6 months. And at the end of that exploration with these 8 Christian leaders, we developed this resolution of what we believed our stance is as Christians, in essence a biblical theology. This resolution is actually the first half of a fuller resolution, which we put forth for our denomination. But these 10 principles served to structure this book. And I remember I was encouraged to speak with a friend of mine, Wilmer Estrada Carrasquillo, who is the director of the Center for Latino Studies at Pentecostal Theological Seminary. And he had asked me, I had showed him the resolution that we had developed, and he looked at me and he said, "There's a book in here. There's a book in here that's waiting to be written. This is such a rich resolution that this community, these Christian leaders put forth together." And then we began the work. He said, I'll help you put this book together through our publishing house. You can write it yourself completely, or we can find authors to write it. And because I was in the middle of my PhD program, I said I simply cannot write an entire book while doing a PhD. The PhD, in a sense, is preparing myself to write another book. So I said, let's do this in conjunto. Let's do this together as a community, and bring together some people who are experts, who have experience, and who have a heart for migrant communities as well. And that's what we did. We brought together 10 experts and practitioners in the area of the church and migration to speak on each of these principles.
That's awesome. And I can't wait to talk about these principles in detail. So in a sense, when we're talking about the book, we are talking about the principles of the resolution. So let's get started and talk to us about why the image of God serves as a theological foundation for understanding immigrants as image bearers of God, because that's what you start the book with, and that's your first principle as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So actually, if you look into other works on Christianity and migration or theology and migration, what you will find is that this principle of the Imago Dei is actually something that is very common within Christian literature and Christianity and migration studies literature of the image of God being important for understanding the immigrant. I believe the reason why it's so crucial in the starting point, is first not only because it is the first, in a sense, principle that shows up within the Bible in the book of Genesis, but also because it serves as common ground. By understanding immigrants being made in the image of God, we find this common ground that we can begin to understand that all of humanity is created in the image of God. And though we live in a fallen world, and although there are parts of the image of God that has been tarnished in each and every human being, there is still this type of intrinsic dignity and this intrinsic value in which God bestows upon all of creation. All people are sacred. All people are, in a sense, a reflection of who God is. Therefore, each person has value. Each person should be cared for. Each person should be respected. And because of that, when we begin to establish that common ground, we can begin to understand the best way in which we can approach this conversation and approach one another in a way that is God-honoring.
Yeah. And it's such a foundation for how we perceive everyone, but especially immigrants, because the voices in the media dehumanize the immigrant. So I think we tend to forget that they're also human beings. We are not talking about numbers here or statistics, but they are human beings and they are made in the image of God. But why do you think that, Christians fail to see that? When we talk about immigrants, it's as if somehow that doesn't occur to them, or they don't remember that immigrants are also image bearers.
Yeah, I think one of the primary reasons is just the polemic which has been used to discuss immigration. It has been highly politicized. When people think about the conversations of immigration, it is most always done from a political perspective, and there has not been a robust enough theological imagination for the church to really understand how to approach this from a Christian perspective. Actually, back in 2015, there was a survey from Lifeway Research that asked what were the top influencers for Christians when it came to their perspectives and their views on immigrants and immigration. And I think the number was only 12% of evangelical Christians said that the Bible was the most formative for their understanding of what a Christian understanding of immigration is. That is to say, that around 88% of all Christians were not being formed and informed by the Christian scriptures when it came to conversations of immigration. There was actually a more updated study that just came out in 2022, and thankfully the numbers are higher. I think there may be like a 5 or 10% difference. There's still a lot of work to do, but because these conversations on immigration have been so politicized and polarized, people just have not been able to have faith as their starting point. Rather, it's been their politics, it's been their partisanship that has really led this conversation. And for me personally, this is why I've moved somewhat away from the term immigration. And I speak more of in terms of migration and human migration, because human migration is a much wider lens. It helps people take a step back and understand that human migration merely means the movement of people. It is a sociological phenomenon that each and every person engages in. And when we can begin to approach it from a larger lens, then we can see that the legal aspects are not the only component, or the political aspect is not the only component to the conversation of why people move. There are theological components, there's historical components, there's anthropological, sociological. There's so many dimensions in which we can step into this conversation. So I think it's important to depoliticize these conversations in a sense so that we can begin to approach it from a more neutral perspective.
Yeah, and you're right about that. And on one hand, the voices in the media, or it's become more politicized, opinions about immigrants are being affected by these voices. And on the other hand, the voices within the Christian circles are getting diminished because many Christian leaders and pastors, as you know, are afraid to speak up about it. And so the only opinions we hear or that are forming our perspective on human migration, like you say, is coming from outside the church, because within the church, we are not raising our voices. Nobody is reminding us to think biblically like that. I'm sorry, not nobody, but there are fewer voices within the church reminding us to think that way. Yeah. And in the first chapter, you move on from there to talk about modeling Jesus and how, we should be like Jesus in the way we see immigrants and see human migration. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so that first chapter was actually written by a good friend, Yvette Santana. Yvette Santana is currently a pastor in the California area, and she speaks about this idea of seeing Jesus set the example for what it means to how we treat immigrants. Jesus tells the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan, of the person who was on the side of the road in need, and a person was walking by and saw this person who was hurt, who was on the side of the road, and they went intentionally out of their way to care for their wounds, to provide them housing, to really care for them in their moment of need and their moment of crisis. And in the same way, Christ calls Christians, Christ calls his disciples into that same work. We see Jesus himself, which is also explored in a later chapter, that Jesus himself is, in a sense, an incarnation of the immigrant experience, the idea of him coming from heaven to earth, to heaven again, and coming on this earth and living life as somebody, as a migrant, experiencing the life as a refugee, as a child, fleeing from King Herod, with his mother and father Mary and Joseph. We see that the Bible says that where Jesus says, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me, and that in which you do to the least of these brothers and sisters, you have also done to me." So Jesus sets forth many claims of the importance of caring and loving for immigrants, for loving those who are different, those who are outsiders, for those who are strangers. And what he's calling us to is to understand that they are not that strange, they are not that different from us. They are we have much more in common than we do. We have our common humanity. We have the image of God in which we carry. So it's important to hold on to these things as we minister to those who are in need.
So good. So I love that the book starts with Genesis, and that's where we also began our conversation, that God created us in his image. And then you move on to talk about the creation mandate and how that ties into migration. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, yes. So this is chapter 2 of the book, and this is actually the book that I wrote. And this is my contribution to the larger piece, which I actually, a lot of my studies, my PhD studies, focus on the ethics surrounding the creation mandate. So one of the claims that I make within my chapter is that Genesis 1:28, which is right after Genesis 1:27, where it mentions the image of God. But Genesis 1:28, being the creation mandate, is the first mention of migration within the Christian scriptures. And that is found when it says, when God says to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, and to fill the earth and subdue it." Within this call to fill the earth, we see that God's original purpose, or that we see in this passage that God reveals movement as intrinsic to the idea to fill the earth. One cannot fill the earth if one is not moving. So we see, again, from this larger lens of human migration, this sociological phenomenon of the movement of peoples. And it is within the same verse that we find God's original intention for migration in these first words that appear in Genesis 1:28, which says, "And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth." So when God had made his divine imperative declaration to humanity to fill the earth, he blessed it. He blessed it, and we see that God's original intention for migration in this world was to be a blessing, because it would result in the spreading of his glory across the earth. It would result in a missional call, in a sense, to be royal representatives image bearers of God, and in a sense, a testimony to the greatness and the goodness of who God is. And that is something that is intrinsic for our understanding of God's intention for migration during this period of creation within the Christian scriptures.
So God created us in his image. God blessed us, said, go forth and multiply. But then comes the fall. And we have a chapter in this book about the fall and how that ties into migration. So I'm very interested to dig deeper into this. So take it away.
Absolutely. So this chapter 3, was written by Dr. Daniel Castello. He's a professor at Duke University, and he elaborates upon the third principle that is found in the resolution. And just in case this may be helpful to frame this first part of the book, it is split up into 4 sections of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. And it is through understanding the narrative of migration through these 4 lenses that we can begin to understand migration throughout the Christian scriptures more clearly. So this second movement of from creation to fall is foundational for our understanding of migration within the world today. With the sinful actions of Adam and Eve, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we see that not only individual sin enters in this world, but this notion of social sin enters into this world. Dr. Castillo makes an interesting point that part of the curse that is bestowed upon Adam and Eve that they receive from their sinfulness is that there's actually a physical displacement that takes place. It is not merely an individualism that they have fallen away from God, but that there is a actual physical displacement, a banishing from Garden of Eden, of the Garden of Eden. In a sense, it is a expulsion. And we see here this kind of notion that of an expulsion or of deportation taking place within this Genesis narrative, and that in a sense is part of the fallen repercussions of the fallenness of this world. We see that the cherubim standing at the gates with the flaming sword represents the first barrier border within this world, to where these things are erected for the sake of protection. And for the sake of exclusion, and this again is a negative consequence of sinfulness in this world. And we see the idea of the restless wanderer with Cain killing his brother Abel. It is declared upon Cain that you will be a restless wanderer on this earth. So this displacement, this separation that happens from God and humanity is not merely a spiritual separation, but it is also a physical separation. It is, and it has an impact in the way in which humanity moves and lives and resides in this world. And we see just the negative effects of this sinfulness within our world today. We see people move because of famine, because of hunger, because of political corruption, because of economic disparity. There's so many reasons to the ebbs and flows of the movement of peoples, and much of it is based on our fallen condition, on our the sinful acts of one another have negative repercussions upon individuals that cause them to experience displacement within this world. So through this lens of the fall, we can begin to interpret what is happening within the world around us.
And in a sense, even our unbiblical perspectives on migrating communities is a result of sin, right? So I love this sentence that comes in this chapter. The identity of a Christian has a wildly disruptive leveling effect. It resonated with me also because in my book, I have a similar sentence. I say, salvation is the great equalizer. So can you elaborate on that and how this, this disrupting leveling effect that the author talks about should inform how we see immigrants or how we engage with them?
Absolutely. So in his chapter, he says that phrase, the identity of a Christian has a wildly disruptive leveling effect. And it's important for us to understand and to reflect on Christian identity, because Christian identity is key in order to understand the way in which we engage, in which we understand the immigrant experience. We ourselves, as Christians, are called towards a greater kingdom. We are called to in a sense to spread the good news to others, but we in ourselves as Christians carry, in a sense, this migrant identity of being displaced from this world and living for an earthly kingdom. And as a Christian, we see an ethic that is placed upon the individual, that is to see the image of God within others. It is one that is to, in a sense, challenge a lot of the broken systems within this world, and to see ourselves within the immigrant, and to see the immigrant within ourselves, and to see that we are not different, that we are in a sense the same, and that we have a calling, in a sense, to care and to love the immigrants. So the Christian identity itself, intrinsic to the Christian identity, is the immigrant identity, because again, we live displaced from this world for an eternal kingdom. Therefore, the way in which we engage with immigrants within our world today is highly important for our understanding as Christians.
Mm. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you for unpacking all these concepts for us. And I cannot wait to talk more with you about, the rest of the chapters in this book. So thank you for your time today. I really enjoyed chatting with you. And I hope that listeners will take back, important truths from our conversation and go back to the Bible and read the Bible, and let the Bible inform what they believe about migrating communities and immigrants.
Thank you. Maybe I've enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to our next one.
Mm-hmm.